Grace had always been a woman of ambition and charm. Her beauty was matched only by her determination to rise above her humble beginnings. When she met David, a wealthy and generous man, she saw an opportunity to fulfill her dreams. David was captivated by Grace's beauty and grace, and he believed he had found the perfect partner to share his life and his wealth. Their courtship was swift, and before long, they were married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of the town. Grace seemed to revel in her new role as David's wife, attending glamorous events and enjoying the luxuries that came with being married to a wealthy man. But beneath her charming facade, Grace harbored a secret ambition to amass wealth and power at any cost. As the years passed, David's business prospered and their life together seemed idyllic. They had two children, a boy and a girl, who were the joy of David's life. But Grace's thirst for more grew with each passing day. She began to resent David's generosity, seeing it as a sign of weakness. She became more focused on material possessions, often comparing herself to her wealthy friends and neighbors. Despite David's efforts to please her, Grace grew increasingly dissatisfied with their life together. She began to criticize David openly, belittling his business acumen and questioning his decisions. David, ever the optimist, tried to ignore her complaints, hoping that things would improve with time. But Grace's discontent only grew, and she began to resent David for not being able to provide her with the extravagant lifestyle she craved. She started to spend more time away from home, attending parties and events without David. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, and David began to suspect that something was amiss. One day, David discovered the truth. Grace had been having an affair with a wealthy businessman named Peter. The revelation was a devastating blow to David, who had trusted Grace implicitly. He confronted her, demanding an explanation, but Grace was unrepentant. She admitted to her affair and declared that she was leaving him for Peter, who could give her the lifestyle she desired. With a heavy heart, David watched as Grace packed her bags and left their home, leaving behind her children and the life they had built together. David was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, determined to raise his children alone and to move on from the woman who had betrayed him. As Grace settled in her new life with Peter, she soon realized that the grass was not always greener on the other side. Peter was not the man she had imagined him to be, and the life of luxury he had envisioned was nothing more than a facade. She began to regret her choices, realizing too late the true value of the life she had abandoned. Meanwhile, David focused all his energy on raising his children, instilling in them the values of hard work and integrity that had guided his own life. He found solace in his faith, believing that God would guide him through this difficult time. Little did Grace know that her path would cross with Sarah, a devoted woman of faith, who would help her see the error of her ways. As Grace settled in her new life with Peter, she found herself constantly comparing it to the life she had left behind with David. Despite Peter's wealth and the luxuries he provided her, Grace felt a sense of emptiness and regret. She missed her children terribly and found herself longing for the simple joys of family life. Meanwhile, David struggled to cope with the aftermath of Grace's betrayal. The once prosperous businessman found himself facing financial difficulties As the loss of Grace's support and the burden of raising their children alone took its toll, David was forced to make tough decisions, cutting back on expenses and selling off assets to make ends meet. Despite the hardship, David remained steadfast in his commitment to his children. He refused to let them see him as anything less than a loving and devoted father. Even as he struggled to provide for their needs, his faith in God remained unshaken, and he found strength in prayer and the support of his community. Grace, on the other hand, found herself isolated and unhappy. In her new life with Peter, she realized too late that money and material possessions could not fill the void left by her betrayal of David and her children. She began to see Peter's flaws and the shallowness of the life she had chosen over her family. One day, Grace received a letter from David informing her of the extent of their financial difficulties and pleading with her to reconsider her decision to leave their children behind. The letter struck a chord in Grace and she began to question her choices. With Sarah's support and guidance, Grace made the difficult decision to leave Peter and return to her family. She knew that she would face challenges and hardships, but she was determined to make amends and rebuild her relationship with David and her children. When Grace returned, David was initially wary of her intentions. He had been hurt deeply by her betrayal and was reluctant to trust her again. But Grace was persistent, showing through her actions that she had truly changed and was committed to making things right. Slowly but surely, Grace began to earn back David's trust. She took on the role of a mother with renewed dedication, showering her children with love and affection. She also supported David in any way she could, offering her help and encouragement as he worked to rebuild their finances. As time passed, Grace and David's relationship began to heal. They learned to communicate openly and honestly, addressing the issues that had driven them apart. Through their faith and their love for each other, they were able to overcome the pain of the past and build a stronger, more resilient family. As Grace settled back into the life with her family, she was determined to make amends for her past mistakes. She worked hard to rebuild her relationship with David and her children, showing them love and support in every way she could. David, still cautious, watched her closely, unsure if he could fully trust her again. One evening, as David was going through some old papers, he stumbled upon a letter that sent shockwaves through him. It was a letter from Peter, addressed to Grace, expressing his anger and betrayal at her leaving him. David's heart sank as he realized the extent of Grace's deception. She had never truly ended her relationship with Peter. Confronting Grace, David demanded the truth. Grace, caught off guard, tried to explain that she had cut ties with Peter, but David was not convinced. He demanded that Grace leave their home, unwilling to tolerate any more lies. Heartbroken, Grace left, feeling lost and alone. She realized that her past mistakes had caught up with her, and she was left to face the consequences of her actions. She sought solace in her faith, praying for forgiveness and guidance. Meanwhile, David was left to pick up the pieces once again. He focused on his children, shielding them from the pain of their mother's betrayal, poured himself into his work, determined to provide for his family despite the challenges they faced. Months passed, and Grace's life spiraled further out of control. She reached out to Sarah, the woman who had helped her before, seeking her guidance once again. Sarah welcomed her with open arms, offering her a place to stay and a shoulder to cry on. Through Sarah's guidance, Grace began to see the error of her ways. She realized that her love for money had blinded her to the true value of family and love. She resolved to change her ways, to seek forgiveness from David and her children, and to make amends for the pain she had caused. When Grace finally mustered the courage to face David again, she found him hardened and distant. He listened as she poured out her heart, expressing her remorse and a desire to make things right. But David remained unmoved, his trust shattered by a betrayal. As Grace pleaded with him to give her another chance, David struggled with his own feelings. He still loved Grace, but he was afraid to open his heart to her again, afraid of being hurt once more. In the end, it was his love for his children that softened his heart. David had agreed to give Grace another chance for the sake of their children. He warned her that rebuilding their relationship would take time and effort, but he was willing to try. Grace, grateful for this second chance, vowed to never again let greed or ambition come between them. As Grace settled back into her family life, she was determined to prove her commitment to David and their children. She worked tirelessly, taking on extra responsibilities and showing them love and support in every way she could. David, still worried, watched her closely, waiting for any sign that she might revert to her old ways. One day, as Grace was out running errands, she received a call that would change everything. It was Peter, her former lover, demanding to meet with her. Grace, shocked and terrified, tried to refuse, but Peter was insistent. He threatened to expose their past relationship to David if she did not comply. Fearing the consequences of Peter's threats, Grace reluctantly agreed to meet with him. She agreed to meet him in a secluded location, hoping to reason with him and convince him to leave her alone. When Grace arrived at the meeting place, she was met with a sight that called her to the bone. Peter was not alone. He had brought along a group of unsavory characters, intent on causing trouble. Grace realized too late that she had walked into a trap. Peter and his accomplices cornered Grace, demanding money in exchange for their silence. Grace, terrified and desperate, tried to reason with them, but they were unmoved. They threatened to harm her and her family if she did not comply. In a moment of desperation, Grace managed to break free from her captors and flee to safety. She knew that she had to act quickly to protect her family from Peter's wrath. Meanwhile, David had grown increasingly concerned with Grace failed to return home. He called her phone repeatedly, but there was no answer. Fearing the worst, he contacted the authorities and reported her missing. As the hours passed, David's fear turned to panic. He feared that Grace had met with foul play, and he was powerless to protect her. He prayed fervently for her safe return, promising God that he would do whatever it took to keep his family safe. Just when all hope seemed lost, Grace returned home, shaking but unharmed. She recounted her harrowing ordeal to David, who listened in horror. David was filled with a mix of emotions: relief that Grace was safe, anger at what she had been through, and a renewed determination to protect his family at all costs. Grace's brush with danger served as a wake-up call for both of them. They realized that they needed to put aside their past differences and work together to keep their families safe. They vowed to never again let greed or ambition come between them, knowing that their love and faith would see them through even the darkest of times. Grace and David embarked on a healing journey after a terrifying encounter. Grace was eager to take advantage of the opportunity, while David was determined to rebuild their relationship. They attended counseling sessions to address their issues and develop a more open communication style. Their family relationship strengthened as they thrived in their new home. Grace and David discovered their love and happiness, making plans for the future. David surprised Grace with a special supper and expressed his love for her. She expressed her gratitude and promised to make amends for everything he had done for her. David then asked Grace if she would marry him, and she agreed. This story of love triumphing over obstacles includes victory, sufferings, forgiveness, and redemption. After facing their problems, they came out stronger and more determined. They shared a hug with their friends and family, knowing they could overcome any obstacle as long as they had each other. Together, they walked into the future with a strong sense of purpose and confidence that their love would carry them through any difficulties.